Well, welcome everybody to another OSHA Quick Take with our friends and partners at Conn, Maciel, Carey. Today we've got Lindsay and Mark joining us, and we're talking about the addressing the employee complaints, relations, and whistleblower complaints with the EEOC, OSHA, and MSHA. So with that topic in mind, I will turn it over to Lindsay and Mark for quick intros, and then we'll get into the questions.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay DiSalvo, and I'm a partner at Conn, Maciel, Carey in both the employment practice as well as our safety and health practice. So I have some pretty extensive experience in dealing with both retaliation claims brought before the EEOC as well as OSHA whistleblower claims under Section 11C of the OSH Act, as well as the several other provisions that OSHA actually enforces under the varying whistleblower statutes that it enforces. So I've had a lot of experience working with employers on responding to those types of complaints, as well as proactive efforts to try to avoid those types of complaints from being made in the first place. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, and then, in more detail during our webinar. And I'll turn over to Mark to introduce himself.
Thanks, Lindsay. My name is Mark Ishu. I'm at the firm as a senior counsel. I've been here about a year and a half. Before this new life as a litigator on behalf of employers, I was at the U.S. Department of Labor for over 10 years, where I did represent various agencies of the department, including the department OSHA, which enforces several, if not all, of these whistleblower statutes that we're going to discuss with you. So I have a good inside understanding as to how the agency looks at these types of cases, and I'll be happy to share my wisdom and thoughts on how best to prepare for them. I think ultimately, this is one of the more exciting presentations because there is a very particular process involved in how to manage these types of complaints, and so Lindsay and I have a great deal of experience, and we'll be able to help you out.
Yeah, great. And I rushed the intro there a little bit, but should have mentioned that the full webinar will be held on October 1st. It's been rescheduled in case you had been at the Conn, Maciel, Carey site previously, but it's been rescheduled October 1st, so 1 p.m. Eastern or 10 p.m. Pacific time. We'll have a link for that webinar in the description below, so you can just click and register for that full webinar on October 1st. All right, well, let's kick things off and talk a little bit about why is this topic of relation and whistleblowing complaints important right now?
There are a few reasons that this is a topic that we've decided to present on now, and that we have done previous presentations on as well, because this has been a high priority for this administration. And it's certainly been a big issue among employees. It's always been kind of a big issue among employees, but it's been particularly noticeable since the pandemic. Continuously, year over year since that time, the amount of whistleblower complaints and the amount of retaliation complaints filed with the EEOC have continued to go up, and actually make up quite a significant portion of the complaints filed with each agency. And, going back to what I said about this being a priority for this administration, we've heard time and time again that whistleblower and retaliation issues, particularly related to vulnerable workers, are a focus of this administration and the agencies that are enforcing the regulations under this administration. There's actually been an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, that was developed between the National Labor Relations Board and OSHA, and there's actually several of those among the various agencies, but this one in particular we highlight because it specifically addresses whistleblower complaints in the memorandum of understanding. And these memorandums are developed between agencies to sort of create cooperation and set out expectations. If a complaint is brought to the National Labor Relations Board, what information are they going to share with OSHA, and vice versa? And that particular MOU actually addresses whistleblower complaints and says, to the extent that that could be implicated by an investigation that the National Labor Relations Board is undertaking, they would share that information with OSHA. So there's lots of different ways that we're seeing this become a really significant issue right now, and that's the reason that we want to address it.
So how should an employer respond to receiving notice that a whistleblower complaint has been filed against it?
Yeah, we're going to go over this in great detail, but the first step is to set up a system to ensure you have the right people in place, that you make sure that they're notified that there was a complaint filed, and that they take the necessary steps to respond appropriately to it. This group will include a legal team. It will include people that have observed specific instances related to the complaint, and so it's important to get this team set up really quickly, so that everything, all the communications and everything is controlled by the attorney managing the case. The next step is basically going through how the proceedings unfold. As Lindsay mentioned, there are several whistleblower statutes that the department enforces, and this is a very complicated and difficult area, because each one of those whistleblower statutes deals with the complaint and differently usually. And not only is the proceeding different, potentially the venue could be either district court or the Office of Administrative Law Judges, but also the process and the burden of proof during litigation is very changes if depending on whatever statute you're proceeding under or the complainant files under. So it's really, this is one of the more critical parts of our presentation, so it will help you understand that process more in detail. And then from there, you're going to have to figure out, when you set up your team, how to investigate the complaint properly and gather the appropriate kind of ammunition to defend and respond. So you're going to be pulling together materials, working with individuals to figure out the facts and determine the strategy in litigating the case or responding to the Department of Labor. And I should add, the first thing that you're going to have to do is put together a position statement, so that the Department of Labor understands the facts that, of course, the employer maintains, justifies that they're not responsible.
And yeah, just to sort of build a little bit on what Mark was saying as well, part of the reason that we like to do this presentation and why we think it is particularly helpful for employers is we go through a lot of practical tips during the webinar, really focusing in on how to make that position statement as effective as possible, the types of things that employers can focus on in developing those responses and strategies for doing so that the takeaway is really practical, something that can, immediately, if needed, hopefully it won't be needed, but if needed, can immediately, be put into place and applied in a way that, will really help the employer effectively address the complaint at that first step.
Right. And as Lindsay mentioned, the incidents are on the rise, and I think Mark described fairly well how this can be time consuming and very costly. So I think you'll also be covering or talking about steps employers can take to proactively avoid employees filing relation complaints with state and federal agencies.
Yes, that is an important part of our presentation as well, because obviously, if you can avoid an employee going to an outside agency like OSHA or like the EEOC to file a complaint, that's the best outcome to if these issues arise, be able to effectively address them in-house, and to potentially ensure that they don't arise in the first place. So there are several ways that employers can do that, and we'll discuss those in more detail during the webinar. But sort of the three main buckets that we see in this regard is first, having the necessary policies in place, ensuring that employees are aware that retaliation Particularly managers are aware that retaliation is prohibited in the work environment, that they understand where those policies are, what they say, and that if an employee experiences something in the workplace that they consider retaliatory, that they have a process that they can use to go through and bring that issue to the employer. And related to having these policies and procedures, we also, really emphasize the importance of training, and we'll get into more detail on that, but, having specific manager training, having full staff training on the particular issues that are often brought up in the context of retaliation and whistleblower complaints. And then also really working with managers to ensure that they understand their roles, the importance of their position as someone who might receive these complaints, the importance of their position and the types of things that they need to do to avoid, appearing like there might be retaliating against an employee. And then the importance of consistency in how these policies and procedures are applied. So we'll talk about that in more detail during the webinar, but that's sort of the overarching way that we help employers make sure that they can avoid these types of complaints in the first place.
Well, thank you so much for joining today for the OSHA Quick Take. And again, October 1st, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll have a link below so that you can click through and register for the full webinar on October 1st.